Good evening and welcome to our early year Zoom this evening. We'll start in a second. We have a number of accessibility features on this call for those who need it. We have Sam and Nikki providing BSL interpretation this evening. We also have captions and subtitles. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says closed caption. You just press that. You can turn on subtitles and download a transcript of the call. We also have a team of staff helping behind the scenes. So if you have any questions, please post in the chat. So I want to hand over to Amanda. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. And as Mike said, welcome to our early years members Zoom. And if you're joining us on the Zoom call, that's brilliant. But also if you're joining us on social media, you're equally as welcome as well. My name's Amanda Martin and I'm the past president of the National Education Union. And it gives me an enormous pleasure to always chair national NEU meetings, but particularly the early years. I've taught in reception and I've always believed, even before teaching in there, and working in our early years, they are the most crafted members in our profession and do the hardest job and make the best impact on education. And what goes right there actually impacts as we go through the school system and into later on in life. So thank you very much for all of you that have joined. It's at the end of a very long day, I expect, and almost the end of a very long week, but you're equally welcome. I'm going to run through some housekeeping first of all. Before we get started this evening. So you do need to know that this is being recorded and live streamed, and in the chat would have been posted the behaviour code for how we operate during all NEU online meetings. So please adhere to those rules throughout the time. It is in webinar format, which means you won't be able to see yourselves on the screen. You will just be able to see our panellists this evening. And that doesn't mean you can't be involved. There are two ways you can be involved in this. One is through the chat, and please do feel free to say hello to people, to welcome, to post in any links, to congratulate our speakers when the panelists when they've delivered their speeches and in time when questions are answered. But also there's another way, and you can go into the Q&A and you can click on the Q&A link and post questions. I just ask that when you post in there, you give us your name. It doesn't have to be your full name, but just a name, maybe whereabouts you're from as well, maybe what area you work in. And also if there's a particular panelist you want to pinpoint your question to, then please do that. So that's in the Q&A, it's your name, whereabouts you are in the country. If you want to give us a bit of background about what area you're working in and which panelist in particular you might like to ask the question to. If not, I'll ask the question to all of the panelists. And please don't wait to the end. You can begin to start posting those in throughout the evening as we're here for this hour. We've got a brilliant team of technicians this evening who are operating the call. You've already heard from Mike. We've also got Jacinta, Ken, Usman, Matt and Dorothy. And without those behind the scenes, these calls wouldn't be happening. So thank you very much also for those. We've got a brilliant lineup of speakers this evening, and we're going to be looking at the impact of baseline assessment. We'll be discussing Birth to 5 Matters, the Maintain Nursery Schools funding campaign, and also the early years conference motions that were put forward at conference this year. So it's a really packed agenda with lots of great speakers. And what I'm going to do is introduce each panelist just before they speak. So welcome very much. Make yourselves comfortable. Hopefully you've had time to grab a drink when you've got in, and you're going to enjoy this next hour. And please feel free, as I say, to post in the Q&A or into the chat. So the first person we are going to hear from this evening is Vicky Veal from TYC, Association for Professional Development in Early Years. And Vicky's going to talk to us about the impact of baseline assessment. Welcome, Vicky, this evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Amanda. So I've come from an early years background, and I am currently a senior lecturer in early years and primary education in a London university. I've had the dubious privilege of being involved in baseline in both its former iterations. So I speak not just from opinion, but from a place of experience. The impact that baseline has on professional practice cannot be underestimated. There have already been so many things, so many headlines appearing in papers and in the media this week. And because we are coming to the end of such an incredible marathon, they may have gone unnoticed. But the changes in the sector are vast and far-reaching. Qualified teachers in maintained early years settings, nursery and reception classes, already face an uphill battle to defend play-based pedagogy within their settings. In some settings, they might be the only voice of early years, the only person with any experience. They may have a well-trained TA, they may have, if they're very lucky, a nursery nurse who's got the experience to support them, but often you're the sole voice that those children have in that classroom. Baseline only adds to the pressure to focus on academic attainment. From personal experience of using baseline assessment, it had absolutely no benefit to me as a teacher whatsoever. It was just additional, irrelevant workload which detracted from me getting to know the children and their families. Its impact on parents was marked as well. Parents were aware that assessments were happening, and although the results of the baseline are not intended to be shared with parents in this iteration, they will have an understanding that it's happening. In some families, that places increased pressure on them to focus on academic performance. For other families, that fear of what this is going to mean, the fear that their child is going to be assessed right from the second they start school, is another alienating factor, something that contributes to their sense of disconnect from the system. And that attitude is invariably passed on to their children. And as Bridget Plowden said, it's those children who should be at the heart of the educational process. Baseline assessment has got nothing to do with children. It's a performativity measure. It's something that is going to be done to them, not for them. It's something that focuses on an increasingly narrow range of performative function, but fails to recognize the complexity of human development, riding roughshod over the humanist principles that underpin the child-centered practice of the EYFS, which focuses on the unique child, on developing positive relationships with those children and their families, of creating an environment that is enabling. And at that point, when we should be getting to know those children, looking at how they're interacting with each other, getting to know their families, we're taken out of a classroom situation to focus on two things, phonics and maths. So it's something that the vast body of research tells us is not going to have any impact on them in any positive way whatsoever. We know that those relationships and the environment that we create are what impact learning and development. So the baseline assessment is something that is going to change the face of what we do in early years beyond recognition. It's not just something that's being sneaked in through the back door that we can do and move on from. It's going to have an impact, especially when coupled with all the other changes that are coming through. We have to remember that this isn't being done for children, it's being done to them. And potentially what it's actually achieving is damaging them right from the very beginning of their educational journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and extremely somber but wise words there about the damage that baseline can cause and the impact on education, not just in those first few weeks, but as we go through. It was really remiss of me at the beginning not to mention Sam Riddle, who is our British Sign Language member, who you will see signing in the screen in front of you. There's also the closed captions available on screen, and if you are suffering difficulties, please put something in the chat and we'll make sure that one of the tech team can help you. So thank you very much for that. We'll move on to our next speaker this evening, and that is going to be around the subject of Birth to 5 Matters, and it's from Donna Gaywood, who is the project coordinator in the Birth to 5 Matters, and the NEU, and NEU from the NEU, and also working in the NEU bargaining department. Good evening, Donna, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. You should be able to be, thank you, brilliant. Welcome.
Brilliant. Hi there. Yeah, that's great. Is it okay to share my screen? So I've got a few slides. Is that okay?
Yes, you should. Are you able to do that?
Yeah, I've got to, let me just do that. Yeah, here we go. Let's see if I can do that. And let me make it.
Okay, while Gaynor just setting up, one of the things to note in the chat is that we've posted the petition to sign based around baseline, against baseline. So please do share that and make sure you've signed it and your friends and family do. Thanks, Donna.
Oh, hi. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly talk briefly about the Birth to 5 Matters, and then I want to kind of do a scoping exercise with you, because my job is to disseminate the Birth to 5 Matters, and I'm really interested in what the sector feel the CPD needs are. So I'm really interested in kind of people's opinions. So I probably won't talk for 5 minutes, although I probably can. So just to say about Birth to 5 Matters, I think I put some images here of lighthouses, because I actually think that Birth to 5 Matters is like a lighthouse in that it shines in the very difficult times that we're experiencing, and it offers the sector a light because it's very comprehensive. And I've put at the bottom the base of the lighthouse, because I think the one thing about Birth, I feel like I'm selling it to you, but I think the one thing about the Birth to 5 Matters is that it's very research informed, so it's strong. And the last thing I wanted to say, which are the defining messages of Birth to 5, is that fellow down the bottom is a Coast Guard. And I think that the Coast Guards are often the unsung heroes of the emergency services. And I think as a sector, we're a bit like the unsung heroes. And I'm very aware that the sector has been treated, in my opinion, quite poorly over the pandemic. And they were asked to work in ways, particularly the PBIs, that were really challenging. And a lot of people are feeling on their knees. But I think what I want to say tonight is that Birth to 5 Matters offers a real sense of hope. So I'm just going to talk about this scoping exercise, and I've been talking to a lot of people and thinking about what the possible issues are for the sector that Birth to 5 Matters can help with, if that makes sense. So I know I was talking to someone recently, Kerith, about this catch-up narrative which is being pushed. And I think Birth to 5 Matters will fly in the face of that, and it can offer practitioners really good everyday working support to support children to develop really good play and learning skills, rather than thinking about this catch-up narrative. What we know is that children's well-being has been significantly impacted by the pandemic, and coming out of the lockdown, many children are struggling. And again, I think the Birth to 5 Matters can offer something for practitioners in the field. Again, the other thing that we're noticing is that children's speech and language, I was talking to someone only today, and it's almost like there's a COVID generation of children who've been at home, they've been born, and they've had this whole year at home, and they haven't had the same opportunities to mix. And there is a feeling that their speech and language has been impacted. I mean, probably some of their attachments are really, really great with their parents, but so the speech and language has been impacted. And I think that practitioners are worried and concerned. And again, I think Birth to 5 offers opportunities to support practitioners to help children with their speech and language. And then there is the Wheel of Fortune. I always call observation assessment planning the Wheel of Fortune. It's kind of your basic bread and butter, but it's changing. And you know, Ofsted are changing the way they're thinking about it. There's been less kind of emphasis on tracking and paperwork, but it still remains quite a significant issue for a lot of people. When I'm talking to people, that seems to be the thing that people are getting worried about. And the last thing I wanted to talk about that seems to be kind of in the ether at the moment is this idea about children being able to make relationships. because obviously children haven't had the experiences, and for a 2-year-old, a whole year in lockdown is half their life. That's a lot of time. So for me, that would be 26 years of my life I would be in lockdown. That's a lot of years for them, very formative years. So these are the sort of, because when I spoke to Ken, he said maybe you could kind of make some, you know, do a sort of PowerPoint to kind of bring out some of the issues. But most of all, and this is what I what do we want and when do we want it? Now. So I just want to know what the sector, from your perspective, anyone who's in this meeting, what CPD is required to use the Birth-to-5 Matters. That's what I want to know. And if you feel like you've got a lot to say and you want to email me, you can email me at Early Education. I really want to hear from people. Do we want webinars like this? Are we dying, you know, death by PowerPoint? Are we sort of dying by PowerPoint? She says, having made a PowerPoint, obviously. Do we want kind of discursive opportunities? What sort of time do we want this to happen? Do we want it to be videoed? What do we want? Or do we want a bit of both, best of both? Do we want a bit of this or a bit of that? And that's really all I want to say, because I want to hear what people are feeling are the issues that they need support with to be able to use the Birth-to-5 Matters. So I will stop sharing if I can. Yes, I can.
Thank you very much, Donna, for that. Before I come on to some of the things that Donna has said, I just wanted to repeat that in the chat, a petition has gone into the chat, which is against baseline. And then whilst Donna was talking, the NEU has put in a link for birth-to-5matters.org.uk. Do have a look at that. Somebody's also asked whether this is going to be streamed somewhere else. It is being recorded and it will be put on our YouTube channel. So if you've only caught bits of it, or you want to come back, or you want to share it with colleagues that you're working with, then please do. It will be up soon in there. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say around what Donna's just said, I think it's really important. The National Education Union, we see the Birth-to-5 Matters, the impact and the practical reasons, but Donna's absolutely right. We are the National Education Union, you are the National Education Union. So what we really need is how can our ideas, policies, how can we make those practical and be working for you? And how, as people working in this area of education, what do you need from us as a union, and how can we work together to get that? So I think brilliant if you can put those things into the questions, particularly if you want to stream those towards Donna as we're going through. So thank you very much for that. Our next speaker this evening is around our funding campaign for Maintain Nursery Schools. Now, this has been going on a long time. Many of you that are working in that sector know the absolute nightmare of the funding streams and how those education establishments are funded across the time. And it's not a new issue, but it is something the union have been working on. And we're really pleased this evening to have Beatrice Merrick, who works in early education. So thank you very much, Beatrice, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Amanda, and thanks for inviting me along tonight. It feels like Groundhog Day. I think that's about the only thing I can say at the moment when asked to talk about nursery school funding. If you picked up what I was saying a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years, we feel as though we have been stuck getting the same messages. So I completely understand. If any of you are feeling frustrated, I share that. So we were already at a cliff edge situation, a really sort of uncertain point before the pandemic came along. And then, of course, the pandemic came along and added huge layers of uncertainty and really has just added to an already really difficult situation. So where are we? We did a survey of nursery schools earlier in the last month or so, and just to say what was the impact of the pandemic. And the messages that came back was that over a third of maintained nursery schools are cutting staffing and services to balance their books as a result of the income that they've lost and the additional costs of COVID. I should say that obviously that has been an issue for the whole early years sector, and poor funding is an issue for the whole early years sector. So this is just a subset of a much larger issue, but with a very particular slant. around the fact that maintained nursery schools, the government has already admitted that there is a funding issue that needs sorting out, that they have higher costs and greater value than other parts of the sector. Sorry, I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but that they have particular value that they add. And yet has left the sector in limbo for the last 4 years with supplementary funding that has not been uprated to match inflation, and no attempt to address the historic inequalities across different local authority areas. So we had a situation where the funding was already really problematic, and then COVID came along. People lost funding both from the parent paid fees, which in many cases are vital to making budgets work, but also from government funding, because although that was continued to a large extent through various terms of lockdown and so on, particularly from January, that funding started to go back to child-based funding, but funding based on the number of hours. And that does mean, with numbers obviously having been knocked back while schools were closed, even though nurseries remained open, many people were not sending children into nurseries, were not starting new starters, because parents were concerned about transmission. So numbers have been really down, income has been down, and that has left not only those schools which already had deficits and funding issues, but those which could previously balance the books, in many cases in a situation where they could no longer do that. So there was the continuation of the funded entitlement helped a little, and in theory nursery schools were eligible to use the furlough scheme, but in many cases either that wasn't appropriate because of the funding needs to keep the school open for children of critical workers and vulnerable children, or in many cases were also just simply misadvised by their local authorities that they couldn't claim it when actually they could have done. So it's been very messy. They weren't eligible for the business rates rebate, business loans, and some of those other things that the private sector could access. So as of the end of March, almost half of respondents to our survey told us that they would be in deficit for the last financial year, and that deficit was on average around £76,000. Only 23% confirmed they could continue to operate within their current funding levels, and over 1 in 5 reported that they have financial recovery plans in place or under discussion. So a really worrying situation. And where are we? We have no sign at all that government is going to provide any emergency COVID funding. We hope that there will be confirmation soon that summer term funding for 2022 for the supplementary funding will be confirmed. But again, nursery schools are having to offer places to children without knowing their full funding for the year. I should reassure people that we have no reason to think that funding won't go through. It's just the DfE going through hoops with the Treasury. And then, of course, we have this long promised talk of a new funding formula to meet maintained nursery schools' needs. But it seems at this stage unlikely to happen before the next spending review, which will presumably take place in the autumn. So again, we have another 6 months of uncertainty until we find out what is even being proposed. So that obviously is not good news. We have a lot of cuts going on, and one of the really crucial impacts of that is we know that maintained nursery schools are particularly important as the place of first choice and last resort very often for children with SEND, the most vulnerable children, children with complex needs. But the ever increasing pressures on budgets and on staffing mean that nursery schools are telling us that there will be real issues in being able to open their doors to every child with SEND who needs a place. We'll publish the results of that survey in the next couple of weeks, but we are certainly seeing evidence that the crucial role that nursery schools play in relation to children with SEND is potentially at risk and being undermined by these financial issues that government has still not addressed. So I think that's all I wanted to say. Happy to answer questions, but unfortunately I can't answer the big questions about when will we know and what will the new funding look like when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks very much, Beatrice. Some really interesting things there, and the survey link has been put into the chat so that you can access that as well. And I think, you know, we can't give the real answers, but the government have admitted, and we are pushing an open door, but we have to push that collectively. And that isn't just you individually in your settings, but actually working with us as a union, with other unions, with education groups and with parent groups, because collectively we can achieve more and we can work to improve education funding for this really vital sector. One thing I wanted to just say, a couple of things. The union are wanting to organise, as we heard from Donna, some CPD in early years and birth to 5 next term. So please put in the Q&As your ideas, and I can post those or give those to the panelists and get them to talk about those in the Q&A section. Please do post your questions and answers. Don't wait till the end. We've got our final speaker coming up, so please do post your questions, and then once we've heard from her, we will then also move on to the questions and answers. So last but by absolutely no means least, we've got Megan Quinn, who is an NEU member, and Megan is working on the NEU's early years reference group, and she's going to be talking about the early years conference motions that were passed this year at conference. So welcome, Megan.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah, so I am a reception teacher in Camden. And I have got involved in the early years reference group this year, which has been great because I'm actually new to early years. So it's been a really amazing place where I've been able to meet some, you know, some early years members who are really involved in union work, and I've been able to learn from them as well. So yeah, I'll give a brief report on the conference motions this year, which link to early years and early years members. So the first one I'll talk about is funding for nursery schools. So Beatrice has just given an overview of the situation. There was a really important motion that was brought to conference by early years members about the situation in maintained nursery schools. And I think what Beatrice says about the vital role that those schools play for so many children in so many areas is really, really important. And that was something that the motion drew attention to. And Beatrice has already highlighted the sort of cliff edge that the schools were, the situation that they were in pre-pandemic, and then the impact of the pandemic in terms of the funding situation for those schools. And the motion essentially called on the union to do what Amanda has just talked about, and to ensure that the campaign for maintained nursery schools and long-term viable funding for those really important settings is you know, high priority for the union, and something that a whole coalition of organisations can work together to fight for. And I was talking to somebody about this, and they talked about the fact that in their borough, actually those maintained nursery schools are really considered centres of excellence by early years professionals in all different settings, and nursery teachers in schools will look to those settings to, you know, to develop their practice and pedagogy. The second amendment that I will talk about was so an amendment to an organising in the workplace motion, and some early years members wrote this because they felt that we needed a policy change within the union around membership categories. So on the one hand, this was a really practical amendment that talks about the need for a separate category for early years practitioners. in order to reflect the diverse roles and the unique roles that different educational professionals in early years settings play, and the different amounts of money that those qualified teachers, for example, are paid depending on whether they work in a school or in a private or private nursery setting. So that was sort of the practical side of the motion. But the amendment was about something much bigger than that, and it was about developing early years activists within the union and ensuring that the voices of early years educators are heard within the union and can contribute to ensuring that that early years settings and early years professionals can be part of the conversation. And I think what Amanda said at the beginning about having taught in reception and early years settings really being the place where people really know their craft, like that really resonates with me as well. Like, as someone new to early years, I feel that I can really see that in the early years practitioners that I'm working with. And so that the early years reference group is part of that, ensuring that those voices of early years educators are heard. And then the last thing that I'll talk about is around a diverse and inclusive curriculum, and that policy is linked to partly to what Vicky's already talked about in terms of baseline assessment and really campaigning and fighting hard for the reintroduction of that in September not to go ahead. And also what Donna has talked about in terms of the early years reforms as well. And somebody put in the chat earlier on that, at the moment, early years children need more connection, they need more play, and in schools we need more space and more time to be able to give young children what they need in terms of recovery. And I carried out my own baseline assessments at the beginning of this year as a reception teacher, and they were observation based, and they were they informed me so much, and they involved the children and they involved the families as well, and talking to them. And the idea of doing that again in September, but on top of that, wasting my time carrying out the baseline assessment just feels so wrong. And Vicky talked about the voice for the children in an early years setting, and I think that's what this has got to be about as well, like being the voice for those children and continuing to campaign, and along with More Than a Score and amazing organisations like that against the changes and the attacks on early years. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. And what is really good about the NEU is we have our annual conference, and members get an opportunity to obviously pass motions, and motions that then we get the chance to work on and to improve not only the terms and conditions of the staff that are working, for example, in our early years sector, but also of the children and the pupils that we're working with and teaching. So, the way that Megan just described all of those things is brilliant, because it's showing how a bit of paper, a conversation in one of your branch and district meetings coming forward, being made a piece of conference, and particularly the amendment that came through, shows that we can make change, and we can make change based on people's experiences and things that need to be made in change. And we are the National Education Union, so absolutely it's not only about the terms and conditions, but about the education that we have. Okay, I've got a question to ask first of all, and then I'm going to start with that first question because I'm going to actually answer that, and it came in quite earlier on to us. Just scrolling up because I've got quite a few, and it's from Lucy. And Lucy is a SEND coordinator in a maintained nursery school, and she asks, do you think it's a good idea to plan strike ballots in maintained nursery schools facing closure? I think, Lucy, I'd have to say that strike action, although it's a complicated process, we need to be very careful about it, and all consideration be taken. Absolutely, it is an option for us to be looking at and pursuing. I think one of the things that you should be doing is, if you've got members within a nursery setting even if you're facing closure, having conversations with you all together, meeting and talking to your branch and district reps, and then they will then have conversations with regional office. And if we do have members that decide they want to definitely take support, then we will be definitely supporting those members, because we want to make sure that there's a strong feeling in that, and that basically you're working together, and collectivizing these issues actually gives us more success. So we have an action committee in the union. There are protocols to follow, and if you do believe in your setting that's what you want to be doing, or you know of other settings in your area, then please do contact your branch and district, because it is something we can explore in that way. Okay, I'm now going to go on to a second question, which is going to go to the panel. So I've got 3 questions here for the panel. So first of all is Margaret, and she said, I have a question about maths. Children being able to say number bonds without resources or rhymes. This is surely not right. Just because they can recite, this does not mean they understand. What's wrong with using manipulatives? So I think that's kind of a question, but it's something that we're going to put to you. And then a second one, assessment and how much recording do we do? As an academy, we've been told that we have to assess and provide data 3 times a year. They also want records for parents, which goes against the HOs of the ethos of the new curriculum. So I saw Donna pop her hand up. Did you want to come in on one of those questions first of all?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the maths one, I would literally look at Birth to 5 Matters. I know I'm working for Birth to 5 Matters, but the maths section, I have to say, is absolutely phenomenal. It's probably one of the best bits of maths writing I've seen for years. It's amazing. Have a look at it, and that will help guide your kind of play-based curriculum around maths. That's what I would say. Yeah, that was. What was the actual question? Tell me the question again, because I think it was a fairly.
It was more a statement, really, I think, but it said children being able to say number bonds without resources or rhymes. This surely is not right. Just because they can recite doesn't mean they understand. What's wrong with using manipulatives?
I think everything's right with using tools and play-based opportunities, because if they don't get that bit right, I mean, years ago I used to teach children who hadn't got that basic knowledge, and you know, when they're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and you have to go back to playing with pasta because they don't understand it, they haven't done that play. So I think you have to, that would be good early years practice.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for that, Donna. Vicky.
To back up what Donna's saying there, I don't work for Birth to 5 Matters, and I haven't worked on it, but I would say that I noticed in the chat a few people are saying, particularly those in multi-academy trusts, that people are being told to use development matters. Both documents are non-statutory. You're not under any obligation to use either of them. I think that the strength of Birth to 5 is that it's not a tick list. So it actually gives you detail about what you can use, what you can do. It's got all the evidence there behind it as well, which, having worked in numerous early years settings, and as I said, you're often the sole voice for those children in those settings, as Megan picked up on. You know, you need an army behind you, and that army exists. It's there. The evidence is there, and what Birth to 5 does beautifully, and I would recommend using it to any practitioners out there, is it gives you that evidence to say, well, actually, here's evidence to suggest we should be using manipulatives. Here's evidence to support my play-based pedagogy. Here's evidence to say that if we get this right here and we focus on this right, we won't get those misconceptions coming up further down the line. And I think, you know, the use of manipulatives in maths has been demonstrated time and time again. It's so sad that we have to defend that.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I'm just going to see if anyone wants to add to the assessment question, and I'll repeat it. It's from Marion. So thanks, Marion. Assessment and how much recording do we do? As an academy, we've been told that we have to assess and provide data 3 times a year. They also want records for parents, which goes against the HOs of the ethos of the new curriculum. I think one of the things that we have to realise and have professional conversations with is many people in charge at the tops of our of our schools designees haven't ever taught in early years, and I think there has to be those professional conversations. But does anyone else want to make a comment around from the panel around assessment and that providing of 3 times a year and linking to the parents? Vicky, you've got your hand up, I'll bring you back in.
Sorry, I jumped back in there on assessment. We need to remember what we're here for. We're here for children. We're not here for politicians. And yes, we have performative aspects to our roles in schools, but unless that assessment serves a purpose, if that purpose is communication, that's fine. If that purpose is tracking, that's fine. But we need to think smart, and we need to have robust conversations and be prepared to do that with SLT and say to them, why am I doing 4, 5, by the sounds of it, different assessments? Here's one that works. And actually, you know, have the confidence to do that. Emma's just put in the chat there about what stops birth to 5 being used as a tick list. Take a look at it. There's nothing ticky about it. It's a very different document. So it's about being courageous, and as early years practitioners, we have to do that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Beatrice.
Yes, can I just endorse that? So I'm slightly straying onto Donna's territory because we've obviously both been working on birth to 5 matters very closely. We've just been doing a lot of work with the companies that produce the reporting software to say you can't use birth to 5 matters unless you promise not to turn it into a tick list, and various other things to try and encourage a culture change. But I think we're all really aware that it will probably take at least a couple of years for that culture change to filter through the system, and for managers and leaders and head teachers and governors to stop asking for data because they don't understand what really goes on in early years. So I think that it's really positive that government and Ofsted are saying don't collect unnecessary data, and it is just about being really strong about saying, as Vicky says, what actually has purpose, what's supporting children's learning, and not collecting data for data's sake, because there's nothing in the system that requires that now. Just going back to the maths as well, just to say that the maths section of Birth to 5 Matters had a huge contribution from the early childhood maths group, and do have a look at their website because they've got fantastic resources and evidence-based to challenge anything that you feel might be, if you like, they don't use manipulative advice. So really good stuff there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for those very comprehensive answers. And absolutely, it's about working together, and it's about being brave to be the experts and be the professionals, and to have those conversations and look at both strategies and have conversations what works best. And they're not statutory; they are there as guidance. Megan.
Yeah, just to echo what's already been said about purpose and why we're doing things. Like teacher workload is just, you know, extreme, and it's such an issue in terms of teacher recruitment and retention. And I just think those conversations about what assessment is for, or why we're recording certain things, and who we're writing them for, who the audience is, what purpose they serve, and thinking really carefully about how we're spending our time is so important. But I also think the point about, you know, people's understanding of early years and what's actually going on. It's been really interesting for me to see a school from a completely different perspective, from, you know, as an early years teacher this year, and to sort of get a sense of that in terms of, the huge juggling act that early years education is, and the minute by minute, you know, you're so in teaching and learning, and the minute by minute decisions you're making in response to the children that you're working with, and you know, all of that feels really important, and having the confidence to have the conversations and to, I guess, like in a way, educate other people within the school as well about early years feels really important.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, I always say every single NEU member should at least attend one annual conference in their lifetime of being a member. And I actually believe every single person working in a school should spend some time in early years to see the impact and the differences, and actually to feel it's the best place to be. I've got a couple more questions. It's I'm a Senko. It's from Michaela. I'm a Senko in a maintained nursery school in absolute financial distress. How can we put pressure on the government as a union? We're a small part of the sector, and we know the government is not interested in funding the state sector. 6 maintained nursery schools are going to be closing at the end of this school year. In my own school is in South London, is facing a critical situation thanks to the funding formula and COVID. Restructuring situations for so many of us are real and now. Is the union able to reach members in all our maintained nursery schools? What can we organise before the end of this school year? Lobbying government, and what do you think about strike ballots? So we talked about strikes already, so I hope that answered the questions. I want to say don't lose heart. Absolutely don't lose heart. We are working hard. We are pushing maintain funding about this time, and we have got an all parliamentary party group meeting on the 6th of July, and we're hoping to plan a rally around it. Does anyone, Beatrice, did you want to cover that?
Sure, yes. So we've just confirmed the date for the APPG meeting, and details of that will go out very shortly about how to register. And colleagues are also within NEU and NAHT and Unison are also planning a rally to go around that. And it's been such a strong partnership between the unions and ourselves and the many MPs who are supporting us. So I think it really is just a matter of keep pushing your MPs, particularly if you happen to be in a constituency with a Tory MP, particularly if you've had a change of MP recently. Make sure that the new MP from last December knows what nursery school is about, knows what the issues are, and we will keep pushing, and there is strong support, and I think if it hadn't been for COVID and all the other things going on, we would have pushed this forward much faster, but it just keeps slipping down the priority list, and all we can do is keep pushing it back up by making it so much noise, get parents involved, get them writing to their MPs and pointing out that if it wasn't for the nursery schools, you know, where would their children be going? Would they have anything like the same quality of education and support? So keep up the pressure. I am confident we will make progress, but it does just need a lot of work at the moment so that we don't get lost in all the other issues.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think there's also another avenue. We've recently, early in May, had council elections, and the NEU does run an NEU councillors forum and group. So absolutely contact your local councillors, get them to put pressure on their MPs, because your local councillors can also put that pressure on, particularly if they are you know, the MPs are of a different party. You've then got people working together, and the thing of the 6th of July, it's an all-party parliamentary group, so it's cross-party and it's everyone working together. So that is a really good way that you can be active in your area and get them to come along, get your councillors to come and visit your settings, and your MPs to come and visit your settings, and really have that conversation and show them, you know, how difficult it is, but what a great job everyone's doing despite the circumstances. But actually, it's been mentioned by one of the speakers, being on our knees and needing that lift up and finding those ways, and get involved with your parent groups as well and get them to come along. Okay, I've got another question. It's from Anonymous, but I would like the union to start to discuss staff ratios in reception class. 1 to 30 children is ridiculous. I really believe this needs to be highlighted and reformed, again, linked to funding and our campaign. So who would like to pick up on that around union involvement? Donna.
And I think I 100% agree with that. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that staff are put under that level of pressure, and I don't know how the union will work that, but it definitely should be. It should be. Yeah, it should definitely. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Megan.
Yeah, just similar to Donna. I was when I actually discovered that the ratio in a reception class was 1 to 30, I was completely shocked. Like, I thought the person telling me must have made a mistake. I just thought that can't, you know. But yeah, I've had so many conversations with colleagues in other schools who for part of the day are on their own with their reception classes. I'm not in that situation in my school, but it's just, yeah, I do completely agree. And I think in terms of the children's, just in terms of everyone's well-being, but also in terms of the children's individual needs as well, I think it is something that definitely needs to be talked about.
Thank you, Vicky.
Just to follow up on that point there about the impact that these ratios are having on staff wellbeing, and our unions are here to represent our needs. We should not allow ourselves to be subjected to abusive working practices. I'm currently engaged in research around how the lived experience of reception teachers, and I think this is something that needs to be talked about a lot more. So I'm glad it's been brought up, but it's again about courageous conversations and remembering we've got an army of research behind us when it comes to play. We've got an army in our union as well. We've got people to stand behind us and fight with us. It is not okay for us to be put in situations where we are trying to deal with complex needs in reception classrooms, unable to meet them. And we know that's going to impact retention, and that's going to have an even further detrimental effect on the professional confidence of reception teachers. So if anybody is in a situation where they are struggling with staffing, please do contact the union.
Thanks, Vicky. Donna.
Yeah, I just wanted to just talk a little bit briefly about we know that through the sort of lockdown, the children that were continuing to go to early education settings, they did really, really well generally, because there was less children, and we know that children learn better in smaller groups, and particularly children who don't have a great start, who've got things happening in their lives that's really complicated. They need small groups, they need more adults, and if you've got one adult to 30 children, yes, it is a really difficult for the staff, but for the children, they really miss out. And the children that miss out the most are the children that need the most, and that's something that I think the union could really get a hold of, because it creates an unfair, there's an unfairness around, there's no equity for children. That's the bit that I think is important to remember.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, we have class size, no more questions at the moment. Sorry, my son's just come in from his club and he's done his fingering. So I was like, oh, what's going on there, Archie? Trying to have a conversation with me with a swollen thumb. So the class sizing issue, I just wanted to add another thing. It is massively linked to the funding, and so many settings are being cutting staff due to funding, but it's also another reason why we have to ramp that up, and we have to bring, it's been posted in the chat, bring people of influence into our settings to show them the craziness of having that many young people trying to learn, trying to get the best out of it, and almost modeling and saying, actually, if we had this is how it would be better, and this is what we need you to be doing. I really think they need to be brought to see the reality of where we're at. Okay, I think we don't have any further questions so far at the moment. We have had a list of ideas put through regards to the CPD that's been listed, and there are a great many in the chat already. So thank you very much for that, around what training that people want, and around formalising the early years curriculum, whether it's Birth to 5 Matters, whether it's using the alternative, also looking at just general CPD training around Ofsted, around using resourcing. And I think that there's a real cry out there when we look at funding in schools and colleges, but particularly in schools. One of the biggest budget cuts is the CPD, and they have more money than our maintained nursery schools. So we are well aware that people in our nurseries and our early years are absolutely without the right CPD, because you can't spend money on that when you can only just about afford the wages of the staff that are working there. So it is a massive area, and the union really want to make sure that we are putting on relevant information about what times that is going to be, whether that's going to be beneficial to you. And I know Donna and Beatrice both talked about in what format you want that to be. And I think that we really need to listen to you about that and to take that information from the chat. I have one more question. So, anonymous attendee, can I ask how we only came to have a rep from Birth to 5 and not anyone from Developing Matters? My school have been trying to pick each one apart to find out which would be best for our school. Is the union suggesting to back Birth to 5, or did it just end up this way? I mean, I can answer that because I know that our union conference decided to support the Birth to 5 Matters. We're absolutely not hostile to Developing Matters at all, because what works, we'd just be like the government then by saying this is what you need to choose, this is how you need to do it. And every setting is absolutely different. So we aren't hostile to Developing Matters. And if you're working in that and you want to share really good practice, again, do contact us. But Birth to 5 Matters, like many things in the union, was decided through a conference motion. And therefore it's what we do as the union. That's the things that we then go on to develop. Okay. Anyone, any comments? I'm just going to go back round in the last few minutes before I sum up from any of our panelists, if they just wanted to say anything further that was burning, that they felt that they'd missed in their introduction or in any of the questions. I'll start with Donna. Anything from you?
Sorry, I was just trying to go through the chat to see what people had said, but I wasn't. Yeah, no, I think it's been really good. I seriously want to hear from people, because I want to know. I mean, someone's put in the chat that they'd like something around children's PSED, but for support staff. It's those sorts of things that I really want to know about, so that I can, because the Birth to 5 Matters is very supportive for PSED, and I just want to know how people want it to look. Yeah, that's probably all I want to say.
Thanks very much. Beatrice?
Thank you. I think we've covered so much important stuff, and it's great I want to particularly say it's really good that early education is now going to be working with NEU to help develop some of that professional development offer. But I would encourage people as well to think, is it helpful for you to, if you are an early years person through and through, as well as belong to the union, think about becoming a member of early education, because there is so much more in the way of resources that we can make available to our members than what we can trickle out through NEU and other sources. So do have a look at what we do, and do join if that helps support you and makes you part of a bigger early years network that perhaps gives you answers to some of these questions.
Thanks very much. And Megan?
Yeah, just that it's been really great to be here and to be part of the event. I think that opportunities for us to get together and talk about the things that are going on and issues just feel so important. And in terms of building the confidence and gathering the information that we need to be the voices that we want to be, that feels really important. And also I just think in terms of like union groups in schools, having conversations about what's happening in early years with your colleagues in primary schools and at your branches and districts feels really, really important too. So next week, our union group is having a discussion about early years reforms and about the baseline assessment, and we want to reassert that we don't want to be part of baseline assessment in September, and we want to make our governors aware of that as well. I think that those conversations feel really, really important, because we know what the young people in our settings need, and we need to have conversations about that.
Thank you. And Vicky?
I think the fact that people are here tonight shows that you're not alone, and it can very much feel like that, being being somebody in an early years, in a maintained early years setting. So do reach out, do speak to the union, do speak, as Megan said, to your colleagues. We're not just there to educate children, unfortunately, we're educating our colleagues about early years, and that's a big part of what we do. But in addition to early education, I'd really advise sort of looking at things like Tactic, which will keep you up to date with the latest research, who advocate and lobby on behalf of the sector, and who provide another place where you can have that community of practice and be around like-minded early years specialists that can really sort of give you the energy to keep up the fight.
Thank you, and thank you very much. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists, to our tech team, to our 2 signers, the wonderful Sam Riddle and the wonderful Nikki Evans, who always do a sterling job on these calls. Just to finally finish off, please look at the links in the chat that we're going through, and please make your comments if this has been helpful to you this evening. We're going to have another joint rally. We've already talked about that before the end of the summer term, linked with the NHT, Unison and Early Education, in order to build on a march on Downing Street in the autumn term, because we absolutely need to put pressure on this government and on the Chancellor to include the long promised and long-term funding settlement for early years in the comprehensive spending review. We cannot be ignored any longer. It isn't just about the workers in the sector, it's about the future of our country. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's really great to see so many of you on the call, and those on social media as well. I wish you a good evening. Thank you very much.